Good. There it is.
There we go.
Hello. Well, hello. Welcome to our webinar. If I've done everything technically correct, then you are all here and with us for today's presentation, The Dirt on Clean Eating and Other Diets Popular with Athletes, that will be presented today by Nancy Clark. I'm Michelle Tuttle. I'm a certified sports dietitian and an amateur elite triathlete, and I'm your moderator today. Before I introduce Nancy, I want to tell you just a little bit about our sponsors today. The Wheat Foods Council is an organization that was formed nearly 50 years ago to help educate people about the value of grains, complex carbohydrates, and fiber in the role of a healthful diet. The Center for Nutrition and Athletics is a website developed by the Wheat Foods Council, and it's tailored to personal trainers, fitness professionals, as well as their clients. If you aren't familiar with the many resources that are available through either the Wheat Foods Council website or the Center for Nutrition and Athletics website, I'm going to invite you to go ahead and visit those sites. There's a whole array of infographics, videos, as well as an app that you can learn more about. So one bit of housekeeping. After today's webinar, you're going to receive an evaluation survey. I hope you'll take the time to review that for us. That's going to help us know that we have brought good information to you and also provide future seminars. Also, the other bit of housekeeping is if you look in the sidebar of your screen here, you'll see something that says Files. Underneath that, if you click there, you'll be able to download a copy of your CEU certificate, as well as some handouts that we think you'll find helpful. So today's presentation will take approximately 50 minutes. We're going to leave about 10 minutes for Q&A. And if you would, please chat your questions in the sidebar, and I will address as many of those questions as we possibly can. So I truly believe that today's speaker requires no introduction, but for those of you who may not be familiar with Nancy Clark, let me tell you just a little bit about her. Nancy is an internationally known speaker and author, and a sports nutritionist, of course. She's a fellow of the Academy of Nutrition and Dietetics, as well as a fellow of the American College of Sports Medicine. She's also been a member of ACSM's Board of Trustees. So for 35 years, she's counseled patients and active people of all ages and athletic backgrounds, from high school and collegiate athletes as well as Olympians. And her clients have included the well-known Boston sports teams like the Celtics, the Boston Bruins, as well as the Red Sox. Her best-selling book, Nancy Clark's Sports Nutrition Guidebook, is in its 6th edition with over 750,000 copies sold at this point. She's literally helped thousands of people by addressing nutrition for performance, as well as wellness, weight management, and also eating disorders. So I could spend at least 15 more minutes going through Nancy's many credentials and accomplishments, but I think you'd rather hear from her rather than me. So without further ado, Nancy, begin.
Thanks for that nice introduction. And my goal today is to help hopefully many more people who are just confused about how to eat and manage food in today's crazy food environment. So the topic is the dirt on clean eating and other diets popular with athletes. In terms of disclosures, I'm on the advisory board for the Wheat Foods Council, which is bringing you this talk today. I'm a speaker for New England Dairy, and I do get royalties from the sales of my sports nutrition guidebook. I work in the Boston area where I have a private practice, and I work a lot with athletes who are trying very hard to eat well. They think they're doing the right thing, but they have a lot of confusion. And I hear statements, which I'm sure that a lot of you hear as well. It's like, I try to eat clean, except for fatter day, my cheat day. I eat only healthy foods. I'd rather go hungry than eat a Big Mac. I've knocked off junk food. I don't even eat birthday cake. And then there are those that say, oh, going keto has helped keep me from binging on carbohydrates. So while all these athletes are trying hard to eat well, there's also a little bit confusion in what they're doing. And I'm concerned about their sustainability of their diets. Many people claim that they're not on a diet, they're just eating clean. And clean eaters, just to put the definition, they tend to carefully choose foods for healthfulness. They minimize their intake of refined sugar, fat, and salt. They prefer plant-based foods. Often they don't eat red meat. They may or may not be vegan or vegetarian. They claim they're being good when they eat well and they abide their strict food rules, or else they're being bad when they don't. And sometimes they cast shame on unclean eating or unclean eaters. Oh, you're having a cookie, as if it's bad or wrong to eat a cookie. Can athletes' diets be too clean, too healthy? The answer is yes. So if you're an athletic trainer or someone who's working with athletes, you might want to ask them a few questions if you have suspicions about their diet being a little bit too clean. So you could ask, do you wish that you could just eat normally and not worry about the food's quality? Do you ever wish you could spend less time thinking about food and more time enjoying meals? Is it hard for you to eat a meal prepared by somebody else? I have a lot of clients that they won't eat out because the meal's prepared by somebody else. Do you look for ways that foods such as white bread or chocolate milk are unhealthy for you? Do you feel guilty or angry at yourself if you stray from your diet? Have you ever put yourself on a nutrition pedestal and wonder how others can possibly eat the foods that they eat? Now, there are unintended consequences to eating too clean or too healthy. And many times there are good foods and bad foods. So the bad foods, according to clean eaters, tend to be red meat, salt, dietary fat, carbs, refined grains, white flour, and sugar. So today I'm going to be addressing each of these topics and just sharing what I hear from my clients, and then giving you the information that you need to help your clients sort of put into a little bit perspective and look for balance as opposed to good foods or bad foods. So an unintended dietary improvement is to stop eating red meat. We all know that red meat is bad for heart health and saturated fat is bad for you. So the goal is to improve heart health, maybe reduce the risk of cancer. And the American Cancer Society does suggest that we consume less than 12 ounces of red meat a week. And they're concerned about the environment and sustainability. And in terms of animal agriculture, I think it's important to know that red meat is really, or cattle and dairy are really small potatoes in terms of the whole picture. Animal agriculture is only about 4% of greenhouse gas emission. So if you really want to make a big difference in the environment, the major things are to eat locally grown foods so that you don't have to transport foods from other nations. And transportation accounts for 28% of greenhouse gas production. And to reduce food waste, because food waste, about 40% of the food that we produce is wasted. So there are many ways to take care of the environment without stopping eating red meat. Now, for athletes, red meat is an excellent source of nutrients. So the unintended consequences of stopping eating red meat is you get rid of an excellent source of high quality protein, but there are many ways to get high quality protein. But it's an excellent source of iron, which prevents anemia. And athletes do get iron deficient. It's an excellent source of B vitamins that convert food into energy, an excellent source of zinc, which is very much involved in healing. So this chart here shows this bar is your calories. Along with those calories, you get high quality protein, B vitamins such as niacin to convert food to energy, and iron to help to transport oxygen from the lungs to the muscles. So when athletes give up red meat, they give up those nutrients. Now, the main nutrient of concern is iron deficiency. In the general population, about 14% of women are iron deficient, about 2% of men. But among athletes, iron deficiency is even a problem among males, 5 to 11% of male athletes. And among women, a much higher percentage, 15 to 30% of female athletes, because they lose blood through their menstrual cycle, so that they have a higher need for iron than do males. And if you have a female athlete who's anemic, the question is, how much better could she perform? Well, here's a study done with iron deficiency among female soldiers. This is a study with women in basic training, and they found that 37% of them had low ferritin, which means that their iron stores were depleted. Half the group took iron supplements, and over the course of this study, their 2-mile run time was 86 seconds faster than the group without the supplements. So those that improved their iron nutriture had better run times. So the bottom line is, being anemic as an athlete can make a really big difference in your ability to perform at your best. So you want to be responsible and eat iron-rich foods. Now, breakfast cereals such as Wheaties or Great Nuts or Bran Flakes are fortified with iron, so that there are many ways to get iron other than just red meat. But the bottom line is, if you're going to restrict red meat for whatever reason, and there are many reasons, be sure to consume alternative sources of iron. So this could be having dark meat chicken thighs instead of chicken breast. It could be having darker fishes, swordfish or salmon or bluefish or trout. It could be having, your darker vegetables. Yes, there's iron that's in spinach, but that's not why Popeye was strong to the finish, because very little of that iron actually gets absorbed. But cooking in a cast iron skillet, you see the picture here, the cast iron frying pans, those actually can be a good source of iron. So there's not a problem with minimizing your intake of red meat, but there is a problem to get the nutrients that you've just eliminated. Another intended dietary improvement is to restrict salt. We hear all these public health recommendations, just a minute, to cut back on salt. And these are given to the general population of the average American who's unfit and does not do a lot of exercise and has high blood pressure. So yes, restricting salt can be good to potentially reduce the risk of stroke and high blood pressure. But the unintended consequences of cutting out salt is that you can reduce your intake of iodine if you were eating iodized salt. So table salt is an excellent source of iodine. And in 1920, adding iodine to salt eradicated iodine deficiency, known as goiter. Iodine is needed to produce thyroid hormone. And we know that if you have a low thyroid, that impacts your metabolism. But low iodine in women is also associated with infertility. And in infants, low iodine is associated with having a lower IQ, impaired speech development, impaired learning, reading, and potential behavior disorders such as ADHD. Now, look at the number of people that you know, women of childbearing age, who are clean eaters, and generally that's, college, 20s, 30s, people are getting into clean eating, and they're knocking off the salt or the table salt, but they might be having pink Himalayan salt, they might be eating kosher salt, or sea salt, but none of those are iodized. So it's important that they just understand that knocking off table salt can have unintended consequences. We look at the common sources of iodine, and you can see that, iodized salt is a big contributor. Fish, saltwater fish has some. Milk has a good amount of iodine. But, people these days, clean eaters oftentimes have stopped doing dairy, and they have almond milk, which is really almond juice instead. And they knock out a good source of iodine there. Meats, fruits, vegetables have very little iodine in them. Now, in terms of just general salt intake, athletes can actually benefit from salt, particularly in hot weather. Here's a study done with some trained cyclists who drank a beverage with either 150 or 1,000 milligrams of sodium 45 to 105 minutes before they exercise. So they either had a low sodium intake, just as a frame of reference, 8 ounces of Gatorade has about 110 milligrams of sodium. So that's pretty low. A slice of bread has 125 milligrams of sodium. So that they had either a low or a high sodium intake before they exercised, and then they rode to exhaustion in 90-degree heat without drinking anything. When they had the higher sodium intake prior to embarking on that exercise test, they rode for 99 versus 79 minutes, 20 minutes longer, because the sodium retained water in their body. It helped to delay dehydration. So for athletes, like I say, there can be a benefit from having sodium. Now, 1,000 milligrams of sodium, that's the equivalent of a bowl of soup, a half a can of chicken broth, extra salt on boiled potatoes, or about 2 liters of Gatorade, just to give you a frame of reference. Now, sometimes athletes talk about craving salt, and if you crave salt, you should eat salt. So salt is essential. It regulates blood pressure, it's involved in optimal cellular functioning, and it helps keep the body in water balance. Animals, in fact, have a specific appetite for salt. Like if any of you are familiar with horses, they give horses a salt lick. Humans also have a salt craving that the brain activates when sodium is low. So while there may not be such a thing as a donut craving, there is a salt craving. So you want to honor that. So the bottom line is, if you as an athlete are going to restrict salt for whatever reason, you want to make sure that you consume alternative sources of iodine, seafood, milk, iodized, or seaweed would be another alternative to iodine. But listen to your body. Eat salt if you crave salt. And know that as an athlete who loses salt when you're sweating, for you to replace it is very appropriate. The next intended dietary improvement is to restrict dietary fat. We all know that fat is associated with heart disease, saturated fat that is. And many people reduce their intake of fat thinking that it's a great way to reduce calories and then I'll be thinner and lose body fat. And weight, as we know, is a big issue for most athletes. The unintended consequences of restricting dietary fat is that many times people end up with a higher intake of sugar. For example, if you knock off, your rich gourmet ice cream and have fat-free frozen yogurt instead, you've knocked off fat, but you've really bumped up your sugar intake. Another problem with restricting dietary fat is that it can lead to less endurance among distance runners. And it also reduces the absorption of fat-soluble vitamins. So we need some fat in each meal to absorb specific vitamins, A, D, E, and K. They're called fat-soluble vitamins because you need fat in order to be able to absorb them. Here's a study done with some female runners who had irregular menses. Irregular menses is a red flag for undereating, not having enough calories. And these women, for certain, they restricted their fat intake, and they had subnormal vitamin E levels compared to the regularly menstruating runners who ate more calories and also more fat. These regularly menstruating runners likely put dressing on their salad, whereas the women with the lower fat intake probably just had vinegar on their salad or no dressing at all. And the regular menstruating runners who ate more fat had normal vitamin E levels. So this is just an example of how you may not think that you need fat to absorb certain vitamins, but you do. And so every meal should have a little bit of fat in it. Too little dietary fat also hurts performance. Here's a study with some trained runners who ate either a low-fat, very low-fat diet, 16% of the calories from fat, or a more moderate fat intake, 31%. As a frame of reference, the average American eats about 34 to 36% of the calories from fat. So they followed this diet for a month. The diets were self-selected. They were taught what to do, and they were supposed to be equal in calories. But the runners with a higher fat diet, they actually ate about 19% more calories. But what's interesting, these extra calories were not excessive because they didn't gain weight. These runners had been under eating. And when they had more calories, they had 14% more endurance, maybe because they had more fat, but also more fuel. So fat gets stored right within the muscle, and it's used as a source of fuel during endurance exercise. So the conclusion of this study was that runners can perform better with preferably healthful dietary fat, as long as they're eating enough calories and enough carbohydrates. So the bottom line is, if you're tempted to restrict fat, think twice and consider adding health-promoting fats that knock down inflammation and that actually help enhance athletic performance. So you want to have, extra virgin olive oil. You want to eat almonds, peanuts, walnuts. You want to have salmon, trout, the fattier fish, and avocado, a great addition to a salad. So all of these health promoting fats are really important to knock down inflammation. And every time that athletes train, they get these little tiny injuries that get inflamed. So they should have some fat in each of their meals. It adds a lot of flavor and makes the food taste a lot better. Excuse me. The next intended dietary improvement is to cut out carby foods. We all know those carby foods are fattening, right? And a waste of calories. So people cut them out in order to lose weight with the hope of losing weight and getting rid of empty calories. I hear a lot about carbohydrates, and people just have this ingrained message that carbs are bad. And this is what I hear all the time, and I'm sure that you hear it as well. Oh, I stay away from bread. It has too many carbs. Oh, I'm on the paleo diet. I don't eat wheat or other grain foods. I don't eat pasta anymore. I have zoodles instead, zucchini noodles. Oh, no more orange juice, too much sugar. As if, sugar, a carbohydrate, is bad for you. So the question is, do you really think carbs like whole grains, fruits, and veggies are bad for you? Like every single, major medical health organization recommends whole grains, fruits, and veggies. So we really have to, investigate what kind of carbs are you talking about? When people just talk about carbs, I hate that word carbs. It's such a big umbrella. And, what are people talking about? Are they talking about refined white flour in bread and pasta? Are they talking about high fructose corn syrup and soft drinks? Sugary candy? The natural sugars in fruit juice or in fruits like bananas? So whenever my clients start talking about carbs, I just have them clarify, what exactly are you talking about? And I had one client who said, oh, I gave up carbs. I don't eat those anymore. I just have oatmeal for breakfast, whole wheat bread for lunch, and brown rice for dinner. But I don't need any carbs. It's like, whoa, people need a little bit of education here. So when I'm working with my clients, I educate them about carbohydrates 101. Sugars and starches are carbohydrates. Sugar tends to be, the simplest sugar is glucose, your blood glucose that feeds your brain and fuels your muscles. Sugar, if you take a chain of sugar molecules, hook them together, they become starches. And they get stored in your muscles as glycogen. So sugars and starches are interrelated. The way that I explain this to my clients is by using corn on the cob as an example. When corn is young, it's sweet, it's sugary. And as it gets older, it gets starchy. The sugar converts into starch. Bananas, fruits are the opposite. When a banana isn't ripe, it's starchy. And as it ripens, it gets sugary. The starch converts to sugar. So sugars, starches, they're the same stuff. They both fuel the muscles, and they're both a very important part of an athlete's diet. And carbohydrates do have nutritional value. So I have these charts here. So you can see here's something like soft drink. That gray bar is calories. So all the calories in soft drink come from sugar, but there's no nutrients along with it. So it's a nutritionally empty source of fuel. In orange juice, all the calories come from sugar, but with that, you get the green bar, you get all the vitamin C that you need for the day in 8 ounces of orange juice. And there are a lot of other things that are off the chart, like folic acid and potassium that are important for health. In chocolate milk, again, there are calories from milk with added sugar, but you get high quality protein, riboflavin to convert food to energy, calcium for your bones and to your muscles to contract. The charts on bread, be it white bread or whole wheat bread, suggest that your grains aren't as powerful, nutrient dense as fruits and vegetables, which is true. But these charts show only like 60 calories of one little piece of bread. You know, athletic people need at least 200 calories per meal of a grain. And so there's more nutrients in them. And there are a lot of things that are off the chart. But your starches, your grains are really best known for fueling the muscles. And that's why people that are active need these carbohydrates. Well, many athletes think, though, carbs are evil because they supposedly are fattening. And they've been deemed fattening for decades now. What's really fattening is excess calories of any type. So excess calories are fattening, particularly excess calories from fatty, greasy foods at the end of the night, like that bag of potato chips. So that excess calories, the conversion of excess calories of carbohydrate into body fat is a tough conversion, whereas excess calories of fat can very easily turn into body fat. But carbohydrates are important for fueling the muscles. You know, some people think, oh, sugar, carbohydrate, sugar is fattening. Well, this is a study looking at sugar intake versus obesity prevalence from 1980 to 2013. And you can see obesity rates are climbing, whereas sugar intake is declining. So I'm not sure that we can blame sugar as being the source as being the fattening enemy. Carbohydrates are needed for athletes to fuel and refuel depleted muscle glycogen. So this is a classic study which shows how if you exercise hard, you deplete the glycogen that's in your muscles. Now, if you're staying away from carbs and come back and have protein, as in an omelet, or protein and fat, as in a chicken Caesar salad, or fried chicken, protein and fat fill your stomach, but they don't refuel your muscles. Whereas if you do hard exercise and come back and eat a bagel for breakfast, sandwich for lunch, pasta with dinner, those carbohydrates refuel your muscles. Now, this chart shows that, you know, it's within the first hour or so after you exercise that your muscles are most receptive to refueling. And most of the refueling happens within the first day, but it can be extended over 2 days. So athletes that are training hard day after day need to be eating carbohydrate-rich diets day after day. Now, I always recommend that athletes eat not only carbohydrates, but combine it with protein. So we want carb-protein combinations. We want toast with peanut butter. We want bread with turkey and cheese. We want pasta with meatballs. So you want these carb-protein combinations with 3 times more carbs than protein. Protein's job is to build and repair muscles. Carbohydrates' job is to fuel the muscles. They have 2 different jobs. Carbs are indeed performance enhancing. You know, the amount of carbohydrate that you need varies depending if you're having light, moderate, high, or very high activity. So you might need from 1.5 to 5.5 grams of carbohydrate per pound of body weight a day, depending on how active you are. So a 150-pound athlete may need 340, 825 grams of carbohydrate a day. That's the equivalent of like 1,300 to 3,300 calories from carbohydrate. Now, how many athletes do you know that are actually doing that? The example is if you're a 150-pound athlete and you do an hour of moderate exercise a day, and you would need the equivalent of 335 grams of carbohydrate, which is the equivalent of a whole box of spaghetti, a 1-pound box of spaghetti. Now, most of my athletes, they're staying away from pasta or staying away from starchy foods. And it's like, no. They should be the foundation of each of your meals. Here's an example of a low-carb, clean diet, which is not an optimal sports diet. You know, so this person is having a spinach cheese omelet for breakfast with avocado, almonds for a snack, grilled chicken on a lunchtime salad with lots of oil and vinegar dressing to fill them up, protein bar in the afternoon, some sort of salmon and a pile of broccoli at night. And in this clean diet, they're getting only 60 grams of carbohydrate. They should be getting 340, 525 grams of carbohydrate. So that's a problem. And it's no wonder that I see many athletes who come to me and they are just saying, why am I tired all the time? There must be something wrong with my diet. It's like, yeah, there is. You're trying to avoid carbohydrates. If you're doing hard exercise in a low-carb diet, you can end up being needlessly fatigued. Here's a study done with some college students who were told to run 10 miles hard 3 days in a row. They ate whatever they wanted. And we know that college students tend to eat too many burgers, too many buffalo wings, too many pepperoni pizzas with extra cheese, and not enough grains, fruits, vegetables. And over the course of 3 days, you can see how their glycogen stores went down. That's 3 days. What happens in 3 weeks, 3 months? And some of these athletes are training all year round. So that, again, needless fatigue. We know that lack of carbs hurts ice hockey performance. Here's a study done with some hockey players. And during a game, the researchers noted that muscle glycogen declines 38 to 88%. A motion analysis of elite ice hockey teams showed that the players with a higher carb diet skated 30% more distance and faster than the players who ate the lower carb diet, the standard athlete diet of 40% carb. In the final period, the differences in performance were clear. The high carb group skated 11% more distance, and the low carb group skated 14% less distance than in the first period. Hockey, soccer, basketball, any of these team sports, stop and stop, very intensive, and they really rely on a strong carbohydrate intake. Oh, but I eat lots of fruits and veggies for my carbs. Well, that's what you think. If you knock off the bagel at breakfast, to replace those carbohydrates, you need to eat 16 strawberries, a couple blueberries, and a medium banana. Well, I mean, you might do that in a smoothie. It's a pretty expensive smoothie, but that's done. At lunch, you knock off the bread and the sandwich and the little bag of pretzels. To replace those carbohydrates, you need 24 cherry tomatoes, 2 cucumbers, 2 carrots, 2 large peppers, and 5 cups of greens. That's a huge salad, a lot of money, and a lot of time to eat it, to say nothing of a lot of fiber. Like, some fiber is good, but for athletes, a lot of fiber can be of concern. You knock off the 2 cups of pasta at nighttime. To replace that with fruits and veggies, you need to eat 2 cups of cooked kale, 8 spears of broccoli, 3 cups of cooked zucchini sauteed with a large onion. Expensive? time consuming, just not sustainable. So that athletes really need to be aware that grains should be an important part of their daily diet. So the bottom line is that carbohydrates are not fattening. They offer fuel for your muscles. So both sugars and starches are carbohydrates. They both fuel your muscles. And certainly some have more nutritional value than others, but you really want 3 times more carbs than protein. And to get that amount of carbohydrate, it's very helpful to have grains as the foundation of your diet. The next intended dietary improvement: cut out white bread, cut out refined grains. Oh, they're just a waste of calories. Or, I'm gluten intolerant. And I hear a lot of people saying, but I feel so much better on the paleo diet. And whenever people talk about feeling better when they give up wheat or grainy foods, carby foods, I always ask, what were you eating before? And the answer inevitably is that they were eating the SAD diet, the standard American diet. They were skipping meals, grabbing snacks on the go, hit or miss eating. So of course, when they start a diet that takes more planning, more meal prep, more fruits and vegetables, that also fuel their microbiome as well as which is linked to their brain, of course they feel better. So anything's better than eating hit or miss. A reason why some athletes might choose paleo or keto is summed up by this ultramarathoner. Oh, I love my paleo diet. I live on meats, nuts, fats, and eat only a few very low carbohydrate fruits and veggies, such as berries or spinach. This keeps me from binging on bagels, crackers, and pasta. I've lost 8 pounds and I feel great. So paleo, keto is commonly a way for some people to manage dysfunctional eating. Is that really sustainable? And it's just putting a Band-Aid on a problem. And it puts them in food jail. And how long do they really want to stay in food jail? It really interferes with quality of life. So unintended consequences of cutting out refined grains is that it reduces the intake of enriched and fortified foods. Foods are enriched with iron, zinc, B vitamins, and particularly folic acid. So the dietary guidelines is that half or more of grain should be whole grain, but this isn't a compromised position. This isn't, we want Americans to get half of their grains from whole grain because we know they won't eat all whole grain. It's like, no, there are nutritional advantages to having some enriched and fortified grains. For example, if you look at breakfast cereals, old-fashioned oats, which are all natural, have only 8% of the daily value for iron, whereas instant oats have 40% daily value for iron. It's fortified. Puffins, low in iron. Cheerios, fortified, 45%. Kashi, low, all natural. Trader Joe's bran flakes, 45%. Brown rice has less iron than white rice. So for people that aren't eating red meat, again, enriched grains, enriched breads, cereals, pastas can be the way that they get their iron. Folic acid has been added to grains for a reason. Here's an observational study with 45,300 children. And what they found is that the women who took folic acid supplements, a multivitamin pill, before and or during pregnancy were 50% less likely to have children with autism. Folic acid is added to grains for a reason, but not all women take multivitamin pills. And again, this can be if they're eating clean with only all natural foods. The all natural foods have nothing added to them, like no folic acid added to them. So the bottom line is you want to enjoy a balance of enriched breads and cereals as well as whole grains to fuel your muscles. It's not good food, bad food. There's balance, variety, moderation. I have people that won't eat white bread because, oh, it's evil. It's like, no, one sandwich on white bread, it's not going to ruin your life forever. Intended dietary improvement, another one is to cut out sugar. We all know that sugar is evil. They cut it out to improve the quality of their diet, prevent those sugar highs, sugar lows, and supposedly reduce the risk of diabetes. But I wouldn't say that sugar causes diabetes. People with diabetes need to monitor their intake of sugar. The unintended consequences from cutting out sugar is that the muscles can get fewer carbohydrates for replenishing their depleted glycogen stores. And oftentimes people end up cheating. It's like, oh, it's my birthday. Can I have cake? Oh, I'll cheat and have some birthday cake. And then they end up binge eating. It's like, well, I had one piece of cake. I shouldn't have had that. So I'd better eat like the whole cake right now because tomorrow I can never have sugar again. So it sets up a good food, bad food dynamic. People cheating. Eating isn't cheating. Food should be one of life's pleasures. And please pay attention to not just the sugar, but the nutrients that come with the sugar. So here we have chocolate milk. I oftentimes, parents are just look at me in disbelief that I would recommend chocolate milk for a recovery food. Well, yes, because it's got high quality protein. It's got riboflavin that converts food to energy. It's got calcium. These are all nutrients that athletes need, particularly growing teenagers. So yes, there's some added, you get milk with some added sugar to it, but that added sugar is what refuels the muscles. I mean, and is there something wrong with having a good tasting food? Is sugar addictive? Or do people crave sweets simply because they allow themselves to get too hungry? So cravings for sugar, I've talked to many sugar addicts, supposedly, who swear that they're addicted to sugar. But really, their cravings for sugar can be physiological. So think of it this way. If you hold your breath for too long, you gasp for air. And if you withhold food too long and get too hungry, your body wants quick energy. You just grab for sweets. Where are the gummy bears? And this is physiological. The body is screaming at you for quick energy. It's not that you're addicted to sugar. It's that you're just hungry. So sugar cravings can be minimized, if not prevented. And the way to do that is to front load your calories. Most people diet at breakfast, diet at lunch, get too hungry, blow it at night. You're better off enjoying a hearty breakfast, a hearty lunch, having a hearty second lunch in the afternoon or a hearty snack or whatever, eating during the day, ruining your appetite so that at nighttime you're not starving and you don't get into the cookies, into the ice cream, into the candy after dinner. But by eating at least every 4 hours and preventing hunger, you can soon discover that sugar cravings can really be minimized. Sugar pre-exercise actually has performance benefits. This is a study looking at athletes with low glycogen stores who biked hard for 45 minutes and then told to sprint as hard as they can for the last 15 minutes. In one trial, they did a baseline just to see how much work they could generate in the last 15 minutes. Then 5 minutes before the exercise test, they had sugar and they improved 10%. They had a candy bar in another trial. They also improved 10%. What I really look at is when they had a meal 4 hours earlier and then the pre-exercise snack, they improved 20%. Now, this study was funded by Hershey's, and they wanted to see, is pre-exercise sugar bad, sugar high, sugar crash? It's like, no, it actually can fuel the muscles. Are there healthier things to eat and recommend than candy and sugar? Of course there are. But the point is that sugar can have its place in a sports diet, and that the dietary guidelines are that 10% of calories can come from added sugar. So for an athlete who's eating 2,000, 3,000 calories a day, for them to have a little sugar, to have a sandwich and a cookie is like, I don't blink an eye. It's when they're eating too much that's a different story. The sugar crashes that athletes talk about is generally due to running out of fuel. If you're doing endurance exercise, you want to consume sugary foods during exercise that lasts more than an hour, hour and a half, up to, or beyond that, 30 to 60 grams of carbohydrate per hour, which is often taken in the form of gels or goos, sugary foods, gummy candies. It works in terms of enhancing performance. So the bottom line is that, yes, sugar can be balanced into an overall wholesome sports diet without guilt or without shame. So in summary, we really need to bring back balance and moderation. There's not a good food or a bad food. There's a balanced diet and an unbalanced diet. Red meat, just make sure you have alternate sources of iron. Salt, if you crave it, eat it. Dietary fat, choose the healthier fats. Carbs, fattening? No, look at calories, not carbs. And look at your meal patterns. When you eat is really important. Refined grains, half of all grains can be refined, and they give you iron, zinc, B vitamins that are important nutrients. Refined sugar, I happen to think that birthday cake is a very healthy food. Here's an athlete's plate, nutrition for athletes and active people, and you can see how you want a plate that's balanced. So you have a quarter of the plate is protein, a quarter of the plate grains and starches, half a plate fruits and vegetables. If you're doing a lot of exercise, maybe half the plate is grains and starches. But this handout is available on the Center for Nutrition and Athletics, and it's something that you might have interest in sharing with your athletes. So my final food for thought is that you need not eat a perfect diet to have an excellent diet. Don't scrutinize a single ingredient. Don't look at salt or sugar, but look at the entire meal, the entire day's menu, the entire week's food intake. So good nutrition isn't the food, it's the whole dietary pattern that lasts for the weeks and the months. And to trust that one food or one meal will not ruin your life forever. And if you're looking for more information, I'll just give an unbiased plug for my sports nutrition guidebook, which I get a lot of great feedback from, that people find that they really appreciate the practical information on how to fuel well for sports. That people find that they really appreciate the practical information on how to fuel well for sports.
All right, so hopefully now everyone can hear me again. I'm back. Nancy, awesome presentation as always. Few questions have come up, so I definitely want to get those answered. For example, one person was very surprised to hear you talk about the benefits of red meat. So I know that there's a lot of controversy about that and a lot of controversy about many issues out there in the food world. Can you just address why dietitians in general might be talking about the benefits of red meat and other foods that have usually been slammed, like dairy foods, perhaps, maybe even grain foods, etc.?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, with red meat, again, there's red meat and there's red meat. So greasy burgers, pepperoni, processed meats, But if you're having small servings of lean red meat, for an anemic athlete, it can be really an excellent source of iron, zinc, and nutrients. So in terms of nutritional value, it is a very nutrient-dense food. There are many reasons why people don't eat meat. And I always look at the balance. You really need to look at the portion size. So the American Cancer Society, less than 12 ounces of red meat a week. I think that's very reasonable. But there's not a right or a wrong. And when it comes to meat, many of the times it's a value system.
One thing I just wanted to mention, there GMO wheat, I've often heard, as we've talked about the nutritional content of different foods, there is no thing called GMO wheat. There are other grain crops that are GMO, but I won't get into that. But wheat is not one of them. So just to clarify that. Another question. I had someone ask about the whole validity of caloric balance, whether that was truly the way to look at things, that there was concern of carbohydrates affecting the endocrine system. Would you like to talk about that?
I look a lot at meal timing and see eating as a timeline. And I think it really matters when you eat, so that calories, front loading calories earlier in the day, the body can metabolize carbohydrates. Insulin is more sensitive earlier in the day. So there's a lot to be said about meal timing and meal patterns. So that's where I'd sort of take that conversation.
All right. Another one. Let's see. This one is, I was wondering, in terms of long-term high carbohydrate diet and development of diabetes and cardiometabolic markers, how would you advise to avoid getting these problems later in life?
I would advise exercise and stay active and don't gain weight. I mean, health is more than just food. Exercise is just so important. Maintaining muscle mass, doing resistance exercise. So we really need to put that exercise picture into the health, that exercise component into talking about diabetes and diseases of aging.
All right, another one. This one is asking, how important is gluten to your sports performance? And a follow-up question to that would be, can you address free needs?
Gluten is a protein, and athletes like protein. So I don't see it as being negative to performance. Now, if someone has celiac disease or gluten intolerance, that's a whole different conversation. For athletes that need to stay away from gluten because they cannot digest it, then there are lots of alternatives. But I would recommend that they do the natural alternatives like corn or rice or potatoes instead of these highly processed gluten-free foods that, like I say, tend to be highly refined.
All right, Nancy, I'm going to ask another broader question. This one is to the whole idea that, can we exercise away a bad diet? And when we talk about a bad diet, can you also talk a little bit about the dangers of REDS and what happens with relative energy deficiency syndrome and athletes in particular?
Okay, well, can you exercise away a bad diet? I think you can't. I mean, you hear stories of these marathon runners that say, "Oh, I'm running like 100 miles a week. I can eat a pint of Haagen-Dazs," and then they drop dead in the middle of their run. So you really have to look at genetics, heart disease, cancer, and I put a strong emphasis on genetics and lifestyle. So I'm not a believer that you can exercise away a bad diet. In terms of RED-S and food restriction, there's a whole bunch of athletes who undereat by 500, 700 calories a day. They don't lose weight, but they just start hibernating. They have cold hands, cold feet. They are, they live hungry all the time. They think about food all the time. And in their restriction, if you're restricting 500 calories a day, you're restricting protein, iron, zinc, vitamins, minerals, and also can end up losing your menstrual period as another way to save energy. And that leads to stress fractures. So certainly food is fuel, food is health, and we're It should be one of life's pleasures. So if you know an athlete who is under eating and may or may not be underperforming, just make sure that they get a nutrition checkup with a registered sports dietitian, because that will really be able to make a big difference in their future well-being. You know, the body can just be pounded with poor nutrition for just so long, and then it really starts to break down.
Okay, here's another one. This viewer asks about the overconsumption of vegetables and fiber when people are trying to eat clean, and whether this can lead to, is this an indication of orthorexia tendencies, and just how to basically advise an athlete who might be in the throes of being overly perfectionistic about their diet. Should they increase foods and carbohydrates slowly over time, or how should we deal with that?
I had an athlete who was taking in 58 grams of fiber a day and complaining about undesired pit stops. So we started doing some trading, and instead of having all whole grains, maybe you have white rice instead of brown rice. Maybe you have white bread instead of whole wheat bread. Maybe you have white pasta instead of whole wheat pasta. Maybe you don't have so many berries. Maybe you have less kale. I mean, you sort of look at where can you knock out some of the high fiber foods and replace it with grains that are not as rich in fiber. But it's a common problem. People, they're just trying to do the best they can, and they get carried away. Moderation, balance. Again, there's not a good food or a bad food. There's a balanced diet and an unbalanced diet.
All right. So we've had a lot of great questions. I'm going to thank everyone for coming out today and attending. I really appreciate it. You've asked great questions. We will try to address more of them in a follow-up email to you all later. Just want to remind you, don't forget to download your handouts and your CEU certificate. And we hope you'd enjoyed today's webinar. As I said, we plan to offer future seminars. So if you could respond to the evaluation survey, that'll help us hit the mark correctly. And if you have any additional questions about Nancy's presentation or anything else, just please contact us via the contact information that we provided also in the handouts. And thanks again so much for joining us. We appreciate it. Take care.